Welcome to episode 3 of Voice to Heal, Historical Military Abuse Trauma. And fumbling over my words there, and I'm not going to change that because this is raw and real. And this is a reminder with this Voice to Heal podcast that there will be a flow of questions and sharing deeply from really deep within, from souls that have never shared verbally sometimes, actually most of the times, of the abuse and trauma that they have been through. And today we're going to welcome Ginger Bartlett. And Ginger belongs to a group of victims of abuse in the defence, who have been silent achievers and proactive in making changes to the military compensation system. Ginger was left totally permanently incapacitated at the age of 22 in 1986. And Ginger, I welcome you in with that and say, isn't it interesting? 1986 is when I joined as well. So we were talking about the 80s and 90s being a time of a lot of abuse in the military, and you were in the Navy?
Yes, thank you, Anastasia. Thank you for inviting me
welcome.
onto your podcast. It's such a pleasure to be here and talk with you. Well, I enlisted on the day I turned 18, and it was 1982, September 1982.
Okay.
So
earlier,
it's a very crucial time in military history, as far as I'm concerned, because that's when the amalgamation of the Women's Forces, which is your Women's Royal Australian Navy, Women's Royal Australian Air Force, and the RACs, the Women's Royal Australian Army Corps, I believe, and we sort of merged, or those forces merged with the permanent forces. So basically, when I enlisted, it was at that transition stage. So it was really what they define as a social experiment, according to one military historian. I would expand on that a little bit more, but it was
okay. That's okay. It's interesting. Sorry, darling. It's interesting how you said that was a time of change, because I know that in the 70s, mid 70s, like if women got married, they had to leave, and there was a lot of things. So you in 82 was part of that change, and it's good that you brought that up, because I actually forgot about that.
That was actually, I enlisted. Well, when I enlisted, I thought I was enlisting into the Women's Royal Australian Navy, and which was the original forces, women's forces, and that was a force that was they were women who were well protected. They were restricted to certain roles and positions and branches, I suppose. When I enlisted, I could only enlist into the trades branch and didn't really fully comprehend what that meant. Trades branches formed part of the permanent forces, which meant that I was enlisting. Well, I enlisted as a WRAN, under the Royal Australian Navy sort of framework. I enlisted into a trade branch as a stores woman or storeman, stores person, Royal Australian Navy supply branch. And with that came I guess a loss of protections that I would have been afforded had I enlisted into the other branches, such as the Vittlings or the RPs and riders and other branches that had been around in the women's forces for quite a long time. So I didn't understand those the differences as an 18-year-old. There was no internet. I couldn't do my research beforehand. We're just given a little brochure, and then you fall back on.
So it sort of commenced. It sort of commenced from then. Already things changing. Already things being a little bit unknown and changing rapidly. And then you shared, which gives us an indication of was what to come, in a sense, isn't it? I remember when I joined, I was abused and assaulted by the mail because I showed up late, and that was an indication for me of the shit that I was about to go through as well. So it's interesting how yours was not smooth either. And then you have shared that you went through something when you were 22 after 4 years in the permanent forces, and it caused all forms of abuse imaginable: sexual, medical, administrative, rankism, physical, financial, legal, psychological, and you referred to it as being tortured. And it's interesting, I called it like being in a concentration camp. So when I read that, and this includes your legal and administrative paperwork, and I can relate to that as well, whenever dealing with matters to do with historical abuse in the defence. And Ginger, are you ready to share a little, just briefly? We don't need to know all the big details. Can you just tell us lightly of what you went through when you were 22?
Oh, well, I suppose there's also that leading up. I guess there's, as I said, as you enlist into a branch that technically there were rarely any women. I was pretty much in the first few intakes, and I was the first in the first intake to train with the fellas at recruit school.
That's a big deal.
So we would
I just want to pause for a second as you share a little bit. I just want to pause for a second, and I want to point out to people that that is a big deal in itself.
It is.
Back then, very briefly, it's just being the only. Were you the only by yourself with all the men?
No, and there was probably there were in the supply branch of the supply course that I was doing, there were 4 women to 2 men, so they were sort of just transitioning women into the permanent forces in the supply branch, but we were not wanted. Yeah, so I think the intake that I was in was about the 3rd one that had. So there was a couple of courses that had women that had gone through before me, but technically I was really in the very first year, in that 100%. Wave, what we call the trailblazing sort of era, wave of women or RANs that were moving into the trade branches. So we were very, very few and far between. And so straight away there's no protections in place, but at the time it was sort of you're not fully aware of what that means until you start experiencing the harassment and the inability to be able to prevent it or stop it. And you start to learn that you're a targeted person and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't stop it. You can't report it. It'll worsen your circumstances. So leading up to, by the time I was 22, I'd already been subject to.
So you were already under the put up and shut up. Sorry, you were already
there was very
feeling the put up and shut up, and that bit I can also relate to you. That in itself, for people listening, is a big deal. Again, the mental, the emotional, the physical toll it takes on somebody when you put up, shut up, you close off. This has got a lot to do with suppressing PTSD that has enabled 30 something years later for us to be able to speak about it, because the brain suppresses the PTSD down because of that very thing that you just said. And this was explained to me by a neurologist. I just wanted to let you know that, Ginger, that just, again, we're talking to people, civilians, that have no understanding of what you meant by saying that. And that's why I'm just breaking it down and explaining it a bit more, what that was like. You just suffocated. What was it for you? What was that feeling for you when you couldn't speak? Just briefly, what was that feeling? Already you knew, oh, shit.
It's more a case of having your hands tied behind your back. See, if I was in civilian street, I could look after myself, and look, if anyone sort of picked on me, so to speak, threatened me, I would be the first one to stand and face them and throw a punch, if you know what I mean.
Nothing
stand
to do with the red hair, is
myself.
Nothing to do with the red hair, darling.
Oh, it must be. But in the military, or in the circumstances I was put in, I could not do that. Okay. It was not there. You have your hands tied behind your back. So you have, so if anyone's sort of, especially in a position of leading hand or a PO or someone who's a superior NCO, steps over there, or what I refer to as abuse of powers and things like that, you cannot do anything about it. And that is the most destructive part. And it does, it silence you, you stop, because you can't hit back. And that is where you feel, that's how I felt it was debilitating for me and psychologically destroying and emotionally destructive for me, because because you walk away saying, I don't know, it's you start to,
you suppress it.
You just got to cope, you adapt, you got to deal with it.
Yes, that's right. You suppress it, and and then you.
You have to suppress it, because you're not allowed to. You can't hit back. You can't say anything, because if you do, you're going to get, your circumstances are going to get worse. So you just sort of bite your lip, as you say, shut up, put up, and it is the worst. And that is torture. That is, you just got to tolerate. You can't 100%. Escape. You can't leave it. You can't jump out of it. And I sort of tried to swap draft. I did about two swap drafts out to get away from it, thinking, oh, if you move to another base, it'll all be better. But it doesn't. You just go from the frying pan to the boiling water, or hot, the saucepan, so to speak. But so by the time it got to before I was 22, it was about 21. I'd been in there for 3 years by that stage, and I also had been in a car accident too, and I'd had head trauma, and in that particular instance, so to put it in again, comes back into context because this is relevant. I had been in a car accident going home from Sydney. I was stationed in Sydney at that time, going down to Melbourne where my family lived, and the driver had fallen asleep at the car. We were on the Hume Highway, and back then it was a goat track, fallen asleep in the car in the wee hours of the morning, and he went off the road, and of course it split the car in half. It was quite a horrific car accident, and I've put my head through the windscreen. So it was a very, very serious accident. Back then there was no mobile phones or anything like that. It was, we had to hitchhike out of the car, out of the situation. We were sort of degrees of shock and trauma, injury, head, neck, we're in quite a state. We got back, but anyway, I rang up, we got into hospital, we made our way to hospital, and there was 3 of us in that accident, and then I rang up me base, because I wanted to have an extension of leave. It was weekend leave that I was on, or we were on, and said, can we have an extension of leave? And I was basically ordered to get back to base by Monday morning. If I didn't, we were going to be, both my colleague and I were going to be charged with AWOL. And of course, she's in a neck brace. Oh my God, we had to get on a bus, the next day, suffering, also, pain, and it was horrific. And there was no time to rest. The hospital discharged us into a hospital, the naval care, and oh God, that worsened it. So we get back to the base Monday morning, get straight to sick bay. They send us back to work. Yeah. We're in
no checks, no medical checks, nothing. No.
Oh no, God no. I'm covered in scratches, bruises, my face. I mean, I had, because I put my head through the windscreen. My face was all sort of grazed in glass and all sorts of things. And I was in pain, absolute pain. But no, back to work, into a storeroom, lifting boxes and unloading trucks. It was horrific. And so, of course, there was no medical care. It was malpractice. It was absolute malpractice. That's, again, another element that I refer to as malpractice and medical negligence in that behalf. You can't do that with someone that's been in these. For both myself and my colleague, I speak on behalf of my female colleague. It was horrific for her too, because she's sporting a neck brace. She's had a neck injury.
Wow.
And made to work. No, I never had one sick day in my 4 years. I was never given a sick day. I couldn't. You could be. It was. I can understand on a battlefield there is that requirement to get you out there. You can't. There's no time to be sick. But sorry, I wasn't in this contract I signed. I wasn't supposed to be in a battlefield, and to be treated like that. But I was, and you know,
So
so
that
there's
that
quite a,
builds, that adds, as you said, you're creating, keep going, darling. You're
there's the
creating a beautiful
expectation.
timeline.
Yeah. So
Yes.
this is what I'm sort of saying, that you enlist
Yeah.
with this sort of uh, view of expectation of a career, and this, I was going to be safe, you know, and
Yeah.
so, and
Looked
that's what they
after.
told me.
Yeah.
I did not serve under combat contracts. Where I think when you enlisted, joined where there was a shift in that discrimination. I think at this time you couldn't serve in a combat role, but then it changed. I was
Yeah,
not.
no, we had to sign, and 24/7. Now ours was full on. So it's
Okay, so
interesting. Yeah.
there were two. That's when I was in this really
Yeah.
transition phase. A really
Yeah. It sounds like it.
I don't even know how to describe it. Really, it was no man's land. There were no regulations to protect me from discrimination or anything like that. There was a
Okay.
discrimination that wasn't in there, that came in for you.
Yeah.
So that's so there's a whole lot of shifting. So I sort of got the full brunt of
Hence the
that.
trailblazer. Hence the trailblazer that you said. And I didn't even know this, and everyone, I've saved what Ginger is letting me know. We only just spoke for 10-15 minutes beforehand because I wanted to save all the primes time information for everybody to see natural, raw and real. So that's really fascinating that you let me know that's what it was for you as a trailblazer pre even my joining in, and even further back, what it was for you. I get and understand, because Christina, who was in number 2, if you listen to that, she also came at a time when there wasn't paid female musicians, and she was in this world. Isn't that very interesting? You're just another level of trailblazer, darling. So thank you for joining when you did and going through what you have. And I say that to bring us here for what you're sharing, to let others know. We wouldn't know unless you were talking. We wouldn't
Oh,
know
well,
this.
that's and in fact, there's a reason why people don't really know. It's because it's been suppressed from the military history, because it was a particularly not well managed transition time, and in fact, it caused it resulted in quite I would say a lot of attrition. Well, I wouldn't say, I don't know if the word's attrition, but harm to women in certainly the ones in the trade branches. I can't speak for the women who transitioned from the women's forces and then moved into the permanent forces. They were in departments that had women in leadership positions, so they had already established quite a safety net or protective environment, and they were looked after. Where I walked into a department where there were no women above me, and I was actually on the leading hands list. I was heading to be that leading hand. I was going to be.
That's a big deal. Yes.
So I was like a football on there's parts of the military that, or ADF, or shall I say, the orchestrators of this merging wanted women to get in those positions. They had to create them. I understand that. And they were paving the way for me to do that. But there was this extreme resistance by the actual, men, sailors, or especially the leading hands. They didn't want women coming cutting grass. We can't have women doing our jobs. They'll show us up. And the thing about women in our days, they're very competent skills, and we were moving into an area where computers were moving, were coming into the system. They were replacing the old ledger system with computers, and of course I was really proficient at that. I get in there, and women can be multitask. We were very efficient, tended to have, so that really showed a lot of the men.
We're wired differently. We're wired differently, and they would have, and I understand what it's like going into that man's world very much. I also was one of like 5 with hundreds, with 1,000 men at one point. We were the only females in that building, so I actually understand that feeling and that resistance. If you can't explain to someone, to come up to that every day is a constant battle, pushing against that frigging energy, the male dominance, and we're not here to bash or put down anyone. We're just saying what it was.
Yeah,
We're just
what it was.
speaking our truth at that time. This is the truth of what it was. It really
Yeah,
was, and it's hard.
Yeah,
You go,
and one of the other elements that was very interesting, and this is a reason why the fellas took dislike or disdain towards women entering it, and I do understand and sort of relate to that, is that I was not allowed to lift more than 15 kilos. You can imagine in a storeroom, the fellas, when they're loading ships or doing, they, the average drum of products, cans and things are 20 kilos, 20, 30, 40 kilos, these fellas are expected to lift. There were no forklifts, there were no,
so what did you do?
That did not exist. So
did you call them over? What did you do? What did you do with that? What did you do with that? Did you call them over and say, how did you handle that? Because I know what I would have probably done, but how did you handle it?
We just ignored it.
Yeah, exactly.
We couldn't do our job.
You had to do your job.
That was the dichotomy. Yeah, that was the dichotomy that what we were caught up in. And that was it was sort of like we were set up to fail. They'd failed to change the laws, and this is what part of the resentment was about. Well, they viewed us as dead men standing. I mean, you're a wasted space. You can't lift more than 15 kilos. Go and stand in the corner. And now we're a man down. And so I got that. At the time, I didn't get that because I didn't know this. This is stuff I've learned sort of as in the years later. But there's some of the things that and that's why they resented us and didn't like us being in there. And but for me though, I'm in this world. I was a very hard worker. I used to work. I used to be, before I enlisted, I was a horse rider. So I used to huck out. I was get in there, and I used to walk. Carry my saddle, which was a heavy thing for miles just to get to my horse paddock, So I was strong and very, I was a very strong person and could handle it. I could lift the stuff. So
that would have been frustrating. That would have been frustrating for you being caught in between. So
so that was a work health and safety regulation that they were required to follow. So I was sort of caught in this, but anyway, we used to just we just ignored it anyway. Well, it wasn't the case of ignoring. We had to. If you're ordered to unload a truck, I had to. So it was I was in a catch-22, but at the time you did 100%. Stressing over or thinking about rules, that sort of stuff. In fact, I don't even.
You carried on. You just carried on and did it. So that's letting us know some of the things you were dealing with. Let's head into what happened when you were 22. This is probably the second. It's interesting. I've come around a few times to ask that, and we've digressed. So if you don't want to go there, I'm very okay. Yeah. I know we're just going with the flow. You had to give the background lead up.
Yes, I had to put in context because it's tied up with the things that had happened prior. So basically coming back to 12 months or 3 years into my service agreement, I'd signed up for 4 years. Basically, I was doing my leading hands course. I was the second phase of my leading hands course, and just in 1985, I think, circa, I don't know, September, around that time, the laws changed, and women could go to sea on a supply ship. Sorry, not a supply ship, no, a training ship. So, and I put my name down. I thought, oh, fantastic! I'd love to go on a thing, Anyway, I put my dream sheet in. Next thing you know, I've been posted to the HMAS Jervis Bay, which was a training ship for officers. So I thought that was a big deal. Oh, I would have been the first, There are a couple of SNs who had gone before me who'd done the course, but there was a seamanship course I had to do in order to go to sea. Sailors would do it automatically in recruit school, but because I was of the old, I didn't do it. I was never expected to go to sea under my contract. I'd had to do it, so I was quickly put into a a seamanship course with a couple of other RANs who had also, I can't remember, there's probably half a dozen of us in that seamanship course. We did our course with all the fellas, all the sailors. Yep. So we all doing exactly all their MBCD training, all their everything that they did that they would normally do in their seaman recruit training and so forth. So it was interesting experience. So I was doing that, but I had part of the training by that, I had an episode where I was in where you're in the firefight, you're in a big room, and they fill up with smoke, and you've got to get out of it. Anyway, you've got your face
masks
enough.
On. That's enough of an explanation. One of those.
But anyway, my body shut down. My body shut down, and I just someone had to come and rescue me. I don't know. I couldn't move. It was just the weirdest thing, because normally things like that didn't faze me up until then. So anyway, I was concerned it was going to impact my, the course I wanted to do. I just thought, this sounds weird, not quite right. So my own initiative, like women do. And by then I had never been told about how the military or the Navy worked when it came to things like that. I did the silly thing and thought, I'll go to see the base psychologist and see if I can learn some strategies and, to deal with it.
I get that. I actually understand what you're saying. I would have felt the same, because you wanted to do good. You wanted to join. You wanted to, what happened? What is this? I completely follow you here. Keep going, darling. Keep going.
I just, obviously I'd frozen. That's a fear thing. I recognised what's going on. I thought, you've got to be some techniques. You can sort of,
that's it.
My sort of thinking, solutions, not sort of where the men would have thought, stay away and go and drunk themselves into a corner. But I didn't drink alcohol, so I couldn't run back and have a drink to soothe my nerves or anything. So I sort of thought in a little bit more different light to probably the average person. But anyway, run off. But what that did was, unfortunately, because in my medical files I had had that car accident history and it had been recorded, it meant that I was a liability. Okay, so so it was a PTSD manifestation, and it was showing up, and that is one of the symptoms of any sort of high, especially head trauma, sort of PTSD, like when a car accident and something, and it can set in within a 2-year time frame. So this was, and it had been setting in before slowly, but this was just because it was what they call a desensitizing training and exercise. You're thrown into something that's designed to stimulate those fear response, and you've got to get through it. That's the whole point of these training exercises, desensitize you to these exposing you to these quite distressing events. But for me, what I suspect has happened, that head injury or that trauma, and especially the ongoing other exposures I was exposed to, I developed sensitization. My body no longer desensitized; it went into hypersensitization, which means it became amplified, and my system my nervous system and brain was impaired, basically. But this sort of showed up at that point, and I suspect the doctor, the psychologist, whatever he was, identified that, and instead of saying to me, well, you're not suited to finishing off this course, we'll get you out and we shall medically discharge you, or you're not fit for service, which he should have done under ethical practices, as far as I'm concerned, especially for a doctor. No, he sent me back in there. My suspicion is they rang my boss up, the supply branch boss up, and said, hey, we got a problem. And and then when I finished my course, by the end of the week, I'd gone back, and they'd basically, I was training at that time to be in the computers, just an advanced as I said, I was also on the leading handsets, so I was doing other extra training and so forth. So I made a simple mistake during that training, training I was doing. And the next day I was charged for sabotage, and I didn't do anything wrong.
That's pretty full on.
Yeah. Oh no. And I was beside myself. I thought I was a competent person in all my skills. I was doing, but while I was under training, I was being taught how to shut down a computer's backup at the end of the day. It was a complex process I had to memorize. There was no little book I could read from. I had to memorize it, and probably because of my course and my freezing incident, I don't know, my memory wasn't working as well as it should have been, and I just got my instructions mixed up, and I pressed the wrong button, and it shut the computer down before it should have done. And I backed it all up. I got it back up again, so there was no damage or anything. But the next day,
and they charged you for this.
Sorry, they charged. Well, it was a formal charge as a sabotage. I was charged for sabotage.
Isn't that a little bit inflated?
Sabotage?
Don't you feel it's a little bit over the top and inflated?
Oh, that was what it was. It was actually designed
I'm hearing you. I'm just
my
like,
career. Yeah.
Wow.
No, it was the start of a whole 12 months of bastardisation process to get me out of defence, because I was technically, as I said, I'd become a liability now, where they should have medically discharged me. They didn't want to. Because that meant, I could possibly be on a pension, whatever. And that's, they did not, back in the 80s, they did not do that. And that was something I went on to sort of address 40 years later. But going back into the time, I didn't understand what was going on. I took it personally. But so basically they then put me into for punishment. I was then put into a job. It was a remedial job that just basically had me in this isolated little room, just putting bits of paper in numerical order and just filing them up. And I sat there for
demeaning.
It was totally demeaning, and we used to call it there was a name for it.
I'm sure there was.
You had a hat on, and I'm dancers, and it was horrific,
that's just
humiliating.
No. Yeah, I was just about to say.
I was on the leading hands.
I just want to pause you for a minute here, take a breath. You've been sharing for quite a lot, and I just want you to take a breath, because that's a lot. Everything that you're sharing mightn't sound like much to someone if they're just listening and not taking a moment to understand. Living what you are sharing is much more beyond the words you're saying alone, isn't it? I know because I've been in, and it mightn't sound like much to outside, but when you're living in that, even all of that builds up and builds up and builds up and builds up, and inside we slowly go, I won't speak for you, insane. You just end up, wow. We're going to wind up in 5 minutes or so. The time has gone. I know. That's why I'm letting you know. I know you were on.
Sorry, I kept going back because
there's no sorries.
It is just a full story. It is just not just. So basically, so I ended up having about 12 months of abuse. That was one after another that led to that. And in the end, they nearly. I was medically abused. It was just horrific. So by the time I stepped off the base, it was all done, as far as I'm concerned, to sort of, so I'd either harm myself, jump ship, or hit an officer. so you're going to be
once you're out. I will say once you're out of playing the game and being a little bit different, I will have to say what happens is you get shunned. What you're saying is what happens is you get sort of pushed. You're not like all the others then, and you're not being obedient, and you're sort of to the side a bit, and they just keep pushing and pushing, and things keep happening. And that's what was happening with what you're saying. But I wanted to point that out.
Yes.
There is a bigger game. It's underhanded. Yes, they do. It's underhanded because this happened with me as well, darling. And that's why I know to understand that it's slowly works on you and eats away and eats away and eats away. And it's not just one thing, it's a culmination. It's been stuck there, not having anyone to tell, not having anywhere to go. This is what happens. This is
exactly.
you know,
And bear in mind, it would have been happening to other women as well, who, because
oh
back
yeah,
then, again, we were thrown into a social experiment and it didn't work. It was a dangerous space a workspace that we had been put into. And of course, if you've walked out after 3 or 4 years, you've become medically impaired. That's a reflection on their behalf, really. So, if they can sort of make you make it worse for you, I mean, they just wanted us out of the picture. And I'm
I
talking
know,
about,
I
almost saying
understand
there
that.
was some,
And other
yeah,
people are
totally out
oblivious.
of the picture.
Oh
So
yeah,
when
oh
it's
yeah, I'm
evidence, we
hearing you.
don't come up and have our voice. So as I say, going back, this part of that era was highly silenced. And
Yeah.
it reflected almost 40 years later, 30 to 35 years later, when we came back and attempted to have our historical abuses and experiences
Mm,
addressed through
mhm.
the through the DLA Piper inquiry, which then moved on to the Defence Abuse Response Task Force. So again, they did all sorts of tricks, to try and silence us and keep us under the wraps, and they've been very, underhand, and it's been continuing on because they do not want these sorts of stories. And mine is, there are others that are far worse than
I
mine, I
know
can.
you're only just
They're all
sharing.
different and unique.
I
Yeah,
know, but I also know there is
yeah,
much more beautiful to what you are sharing. And I want to again
yeah.
say
Oh
to
gosh, yeah.
people,
No,
because
don't
you're
bother
sharing,
you.
there is so much more. There is
Oh,
so
it
much
is.
more. We could do
Oh, it's
20 of
layered.
these, and you'd only be just starting to scratch
Exactly. It's
the
layered.
depth. Mm-hmm.
It's layered, but so it's important that women in from our era, from that era of the, especially in the sort of late 70s, 80s, and 90s, who were
Yes.
served in that time frame, their voices do need to be heard and acknowledged because they served in the military. They did so under honourable, and they did so to have careers. They did so for all genuine and naive and whatever reasons. You just go in there,
Yes.
because we had been fed a particular picture, an expectation,
Yes.
thought we're going to get that, but the reality did not match
No.
what the job description that we were sort of told or sold, or and that comes back with a lot of the myth that surrounds the military. Then there's a big divide between that. So but anyway, I mean, that's it's historical, but at the same time, I would like to see uh, our cohort, I guess, recognised, acknowledged, and not hidden and suppressed, which is what they're doing. So what you are doing is I don't know. It's just amazing, and it's thank you so much for, as again, giving myself the opportunity to just
Voice.
discuss or talk about
Mm,
that
mm.
particular type of workplace environment that women had worked in it, back then, and why, and how come some of us, not all, I can't put a finger as to how many, because I've not been able to get that figure of how many of us did not go on to have great careers out of it, and many of us fell away due to our injuries and traumas and exposures and systemic failures that we were sort of subjected to, and
And we carry
some
this
other
for the
things.
rest of our lives. One thing,
Yeah,
darling, thank you for
exactly.
sharing
We
and
can't.
saying that is
Yeah.
for me, and I'm pretty sure it's for you. This is for life. What you're doing in
Oh,
helping others now with the advocacy work that you're doing with the RSL and everything else that you're doing. And I have had a couple email me about abuse still happening. I was surprised that after 33 years of what, from my incident and longer for yours, how a lot has changed. Things are in process. There's still a long way to go. Yet here we are speaking up, voicing to heal, encouraging others to come forward. And also, again, PTSD from back then, put up and shut up, was suppressed in us. And it takes, again, the neurologist told me this, that the psyche then starts releasing as we grow older after about 30 years. It's giving us a chance to be able to speak. We couldn't speak. I couldn't speak before here. And probably you as well. I don't know. But now
of
is the
course.
time
And
that we're speaking now. It has to be the right people,
yeah.
the right time. Yeah, you go.
Oh, as you say, your voice and your mind is unable. You can't communicate, but your body
No.
communicates it. That's why
Oh
you're
yeah.
disabled. That's why you're
Oh
crippled
yeah.
by. And that's how my body was expressing it. I was crippled
Yeah.
with, uh, you know, a disease that just
Well, when you shared right
fibro,
back from the beginning,
it was horrific. Sorry.
when you
Yeah.
shared back from the beginning, I wanted to say that, I'm going to say it now, is
Yeah.
when you first couldn't speak, there was nothing. What happens is we suppress, when I was talking at the beginning, and what happens, we suppress into our body's organs, is what I was going to say back then,
Yeah.
and kept going. So now where the loop's coming around to wind up, that we suppress into our organs. And now, after all this time, holy dooly.
Oh,
As
definitely.
you
And
said, the
that's
fibromyalgia, the everything else that you've endured. Oh, there's so much more. There's so
oh,
much more
that's right.
physical,
That's
and it's for life, because we
stored. It's
signed up
stored.
for
And
life. Yeah.
yeah, it does. It rewires how your nervous system is and your whole
Yep.
cellular system. And there's also elements and added to that. We were also exposed to poisons as well. So that can also impair our capacity to heal a lot of our nervous system as well. There's damage done to my liver and things like that that are external to sort of just the abuse. As I said, there was layers upon layers of factors that contributed to disablement. And
Yeah.
so for me personally,
Yeah.
mine's a layered health condition or causation, I could say, of where what I have to deal with. So mine is completely and utterly unretractable, as they say. It's permanent. But I did find once you go back and address some of those unresolved hurts, which was tied to some of that trauma, and that's why going down the compensation, or at least the process of restorative justice, which was offered to us, and things like that.
Restorative justice. I like
Justice,
those
well, there
words.
we go. For
Restorative
that.
justice.
Not technically, it's only little bits. We haven't had the full restorative justice, like getting some of those people that we'd like to see charged. We're still working on that element. That is a component that still is elusive, and I'd like to see that. And I hear from the Royal Commission that that's a recommendation, that they're going to do an inquiry into users, and hopefully that results in some of the what they call military sexual trauma survivors cases being properly, because I think if you go through the justice system, that is closure. That's reclaiming your sense of because you're no longer sitting in the victim. So I don't like that. I never used to. If you step forward and go and try and get that person, like I said, when an incident happens and you're a sort of the one who's knocked down to the ground, and you can't get up and hit them back in whatever capacity, even if it's to go away and report them and have them charged, that's still a capacity to sort of get that power back. Well, you might have knocked me down to the ground or done whatever, but at least I was able to get that vindication or justice back when I was able to. So the military denies anyone who's been harmed by any of their NCOs or a perpetrator. They protect. It's a protective abuse protective culture workplace, which is also a moral injury. So you've got, as I said, there's that capacity, but I found going through the compensation, there is a degree of addressing that moral injury and having that that aspect of the psyche healed or integrated. It often is not integrated. We can't integrate it until other physical or as I say, practical things, real life, being involved in that, as you found out, you've got to go through the litigation and stuff to really get you've got to go through the hard yards, the hard words, the minefield for it to become real. That's what I'm saying. It's those, you can't just sort of try and integrate it by thought. It has to be in the real sort of book.
That's true. And about taking your power back and encouraging people to do that is a beautiful thing to do. We're going to wind up here, darling.
Yes.
I've loved talking to you and meeting you, and I knew it would go so well. because we understand we've been through something back from a time, and it's just beautiful that we're still alive, and you're here still alive like me by your sheer dogged determination in all the things that you're doing, still lobbying and everything. And I want to really thank you on behalf of me and all the other males and females for everything that you're still doing, and all the others and everybody else that's fighting their personal battles as well. Please know this is not new. You're definitely not alone. You're definitely not on your own. And I hope that this podcast and this sharing today has helped others to get an insight of what really happens and the survivors behind the scenes. And we're still going, and we're still here speaking. So
thank you. Yes, and I'd like to say too that it's not a women thing. It was a male thing, and that's one of the beauty of the advocacy work. I've met some, and I support and work with. I suppose not literally work with, but in that sort of networking and supportive capacity, men from the era that we were in and predated that had just as horrific stories and similar
100%.
stories and all sorts of that. And it's helped me bring that balance back into my perspective that I sort of walked away with a very one-sided view. But I've now sort of said, there's, it wasn't it was just how they managed their workforce, and it was not kosher. That's all I can say. The Royal Commission is evidence of that. They're coming back and hearing about that, and they're now saying, hang on here, let's make improvements and changes.
Good.
That's what we're advocating for, to ensure our the young women, men and women that go in now, not end up far worse than their enemies are.
F's up like us. Were you going to say F's up like us? I am joking, but I am joking.
Well,
but I did tell you I'm going to keep it very real. Sorry, darling.
And I'll finish up and appreciate it. And it was lovely talking with you. And
thank you.
Yeah. Hopefully,
thank you for coming on, Ginger.
Thank you.
I'll talk to you after this. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. All right, Ginger. Bye, darling. Bye.
Bye-bye.